Right, ji. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, rather good night. So today we are continuing with the narration of the book Choose Your WoW, a disciplined agile delivery handbook for optimizing your way of working by Scott W. Ambler and Mark Lyons. And today we intend to start the 5th chapter. Let me get there. Here it is. Right. I hope you are able to see the screen. Right. So I start the narration from here. It is chapter 5, process goals. Previous to this, in 4th chapter, we studied the roles and responsibilities. This chapter starts with a quotation by Gene Roddenberry. We must learn not just to accept differences between ourselves and our ideas, but to enthusiastically welcome and enjoy them. Before starting the chapter, I must first read out the key points in this chapter. Although every team works in a unique way, they still need to address the same process goals, process outcomes. Process goals guide you through what you need to think about and your potential options. They don't prescribe what to do. DAD process goals provide you with choices, each of which has trade-offs. Strive to do the best you can do right now in the situation that you face. The DAD process goals appear overly complicated at first, but ask yourself what you would remove. So this is optional. On to the main text of the chapter. Disciplined Agile Delivery (DAD) takes a straightforward approach to support teams in choosing their way of working. Wow. Process goals guide teams through the process-related decisions and they need to make to tailor agile strategies to address the context of the situation that they face. Some people like to call this capability-driven WoW. Process outcomes-driven WoW are a vector-driven approach. Each of DAD's process goals define a high-level process outcome, such as improving quality or explaining the initial scope. Without prescribing how to do so, instead a process goal indicates the issue you need to consider, what we call decision points, and some potential options you may choose to adopt. Process goals guide teams through the process-related decisions that they need to make to tailor and scale agile strategies to address the context of the situation that they face. This tailoring effort should take hours at most, not days, and DAD's straightforward goal diagrams help you to streamline doing so. Process goals are a recommended approach to support teams in choosing their WoW and are a critical part of disciplined Agile's process scaffolding. Why a goal-driven approach? In chapter 1, we learned that there are several good reasons why a team should own their process and why they should choose and then evolve their WoW over time. First, every team faces a unique situation and therefore should tailor their approach to best address that situation and evolve their WoW as the situation evolves. In other words, context counts. Second, you need to have choices and know what those choices are. You can't even own process if you don't know what's for sale. Third, we want to be awesome as what we do, so we need the flexibility to experiment with ways of working so that we can discover how to be the most awesome team we can be. Most teams struggle to truly own their process, mostly because they don't have the process expertise within the team to do so. So they need some help, and process goals are an important part of that help. Our experience is that there are several fundamental advantages to taking a goal-driven approach to agile solution delivery. Number one, it enables teams to focus on process outcomes, not on process compliance. Number two, it provides a concise, shared pathway to leaner, less wasteful process decisions. Number 3, it supports choosing your WoW by making process decisions explicit. 4, it makes your process options very clear and thereby makes it easier to identify the appropriate strategy for the situation you find yourself in. 5, it enables effective scaling, providing you with strategies that are sophisticated enough to address the complexities that you face at scale. 6, it takes the guesswork out of extending agile methods and thereby enables you to focus on your actual job, which is to provide value to your stakeholders. 7, it makes it clear that risks you are taking on and thus enables you to increase the likelihood of success. And lastly, number 8, it hints at an agile maturity model. This is important for an organization struggling to move away from traditional maturity models. How much detail is enough? The amount of process detail that you require as a person or as a team varies based on your situation. In general, more experienced you are, the less details you need. Figure 5.1 overviews how we have chosen to capture the details of DAD, starting with high-level outcome-based process goals all the way down to the nitty-gritty details of a specific practice. This book addresses the first 3 levels: process goals, process goal diagrams, and option tables. The 4th level, detailed practice strategy descriptions, would be tens of thousands of printed pages. The Agile Lean Canon is very, very large, and our aim with DAD is to help put it on context for you. As you see in figure 5.1, so before I can start explaining these 4 levels of detail, which it comes to describing process goal, I should first move on to figure 5.1 as if you know what it is. So on the screen, you can see the levels of detail with process goals. This is 4 levels. The top is the process goal, then process goal diagrams, then option table, and practice strategy and description. Uh, on the top we have got overview, and on the bottom we have got detailed instruction. So practice strategy descriptions, this is not included in this book, and this book will give us the first 2 top level things: process goal diagrams, and option tables. So this is what it is all about. You have to refer to other resources for practice strategy and description. Coming back to the description of these 4 items: process goal, the named process outcome, for example, identify architecture strategy, accelerate value delivery, deploy the solution, or grow team members. Named process goals are useful to provide a consistent language to discuss process related issues across teams with potentially very different vows. Number 2, process goal diagram. This is the visual depiction of the aspect you need to think through about the goal that we call decision points, and several options for each decision point to choose from. We are not saying that we have identified every possible technique available to you, but we have identified enough to give you a good range of options and make it clear that you do in fact have choices. In many ways, a process goal diagram is an advanced version of the decision tree, and an example of one is depicted in figure 5.4 later in this chapter. Process goal diagrams are useful for experienced practitioners, including agile coaches, as overviews of what they need to consider with tailoring the portion of their WoW addressed by that goal. Option tables. The option table provides a brief summary of potential practices or strategies that you should consider adopting to address a given decision point. For each option, the trade-offs associated with it are also provided so as to put it in context. There is no such thing as a best practice. Every given practice strategy works well in some context and is inappropriate in other contexts. Option tables help you to identify what you believe to be the best option for your team to experiment with in the current situation that you face. Table 5.1 provides an example of one later in this chapter. Practice strategy and descriptions. Every technique is described through blogs, articles, and in some cases, one or more books. For example, there are thousands of blog postings and articles about test-driven development, and as well as several good books. Our aim is to point you in the right direction to these great resources. Figure 5.2 shows the goals of a DAD team grouped by the 3 phases of inception, construction, and transition. as well as the goals that are ongoing throughout the life cycle. If you know your process history, you may have noticed that we adopted the phase name from the Unified Process UP by Christian. More accurately, we adopted three of the four names from UP because DAD doesn't have an elaboration phase. Unlike UP, some people will point to this as evidence that DAD is just UP. But if you are actually familiar with UP, you will recognize that this clearly isn't true. We choose to adopt these names because, frankly, they were perfectly fine. Our philosophy is to reuse and leverage as many great ideas as possible, including terminology, and not invent new terminology if we can avoid doing so. So here you have the diagram, figure 5.2. It might be visible on your screens. Okay, what do we have here? We have got inception, construction, and transition phase, as we talked about. This has been adopted from UP. And then we have got another which is called ongoing. In inception is get the team going in the right direction. And for that, we form the team, we align with enterprise direction, we explore scope, we identify architectural strategy, plan the release, develop test strategy, develop common vision, secure funding. And in construction, which is incrementally building a consumable solution, we prove architecture early, address changing stakeholder needs, produce a potentially consumable solution, improve quality, and accelerate value delivery. In transition, which means release the solution into production, we have two processes: ensure production readiness and deploy the solution. And in ongoing, which is improve and work in an enterprise aware manner, we have six processes: grow team members, evolve way of working, coordinate activities, leverage and enhance existing infrastructure, address risk, and govern delivery team. So we have 8 processes in inception, 5 in construction, 2 in transition, and 6 in ongoing. That comes out to be 21 processes. So there are 21 processes which we will be talking about. Process goal diagrams. Although listing the high-level process goals in figure 5.2 is a good start, most people need more information than that. To go to the next level of detail, we use a goal diagram, the notation for which is described in figure 5.3, and an example of which is shown in figure 5.4. First, let's explore the notations. Process goals. Process goals are shown as rounded rectangles. Decision points. Decision points, which are process issues that you need to consider addressing, are shown as rectangles. Process goals will have 2 or more decision points, with most goals having 4 or 5 decision points. Although some have more, each decision point can be addressed by practices, strategies that are presented in a list to the right. Sometimes there are decision points that you will not have to address given your situation. For example, the coordinate activities process goal has a coordinate across program decision point that only applies if your team is part of a larger team of teams. Ordered option list. An ordered option list is depicted with an arrow to the left of the list of the techniques. What we mean by this is that the techniques appearing at the top of the list are more desirable, generally more effective in practice, and the less desirable techniques are at the bottom of the list. Your team, of course, should strive to adopt the most effective techniques they are capable of performing given the context of the situation that they face. In other words, to the best that you can put, but be aware that there are potentially better techniques that you can choose to adopt at some point. From the point of view of complexity theory, a decision point with an ordered option list is effectively a vector that indicates a change path. In figure 5.4, the level of detail of the scope document decision point has an ordered set of options, whereas the second one does not. Unordered option list An unordered option list is depicted without an arrow. Each option has advantages and disadvantages, but it isn't clear how to rank the options fairly. Potential starting point are shown in bold italics because there may be many techniques to choose from. We indicate default techniques in bolded italic. These defaults are good starting points for small teams new to Agile that they are taking on a straightforward problem. There are almost always strategies from Scrum, extreme programming, and Agile modeling with a few unified process ideas thrown in to round things out. Okay, let's look at figure 5.3. What does it say? It explains our process goal is example in the notation of a process goal. Our process goal, you see, it is a kind of a rectangle with rounded boxes. So this is our process goal. And the rectangles itself, they are the decision points. Our decision point are another decision point. Both decision points are shown as a rectangle. Then you have got two types of lists. One with an arrow, that is an ordered list. We have got a number of options. The top options are the highest, available options, the most desirable strategy, and lowest are the least desirable. And then if there is no arrow mentioned in the list, then all these options are unordered and anything could have been working for you. Looking, this is just a notation. 5.4 gives us one of the processes itself. So what is the process? You can see the process is explore scope. So it has got a number of decision points. First of all, explore purpose. And to explore purpose, what are the various tools you can use? You can use the impact maps, mind maps, modified impact map, and the outcome could be value proposition canvas. Similarly, uh, explore scope can have another decision point, and that could be explore usage, in which we have apex, persona, UML, use case diagrams, user scenario, use cases, user story maps. You see, all of these various tools, those who are aware about Agile would know what they are, but some of those things which are not really understandable, you have never heard about them, you can always find description about them from various blogs, from Wikipedia or many other sources. Those things are defined elsewhere. Explore scope, explore the domain. Then we have got domain conceptual model, event storming, glossary, logical data model, UML class diagrams. And you see all of these things. This is how a process is going to be explained. So this was a goal diagram for explore scope. Moving on, it is common to combine several options from a given list in practice. For example, consider the explore usage decision point in figure 5.4. It is common for teams that are new to Agile to apply Apex user stories and user story maps to explore usage requirements. This is exactly what we have seen right now. I'll just go back and show you. You see, explore usage. You have got, sorry, okay, explore usage. We have Apex, Persona, UML, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's explore the explore scope goal diagram 5.4 a bit more. There is a process goal that you should address at the beginning of the life cycle during inception. It's your following a life cycle that includes an inception phase. See chapter 6, where some agile method will simply advise you to initially populate a product backlog with some user stories. The goal diagram makes it clear that you might want to be a bit more sophisticated in your approach. What level of detail should you capture, if any, and how are you going to explore potential usage of the system? Are the UI requirements? Are the business processes supported by the solution? Default techniques are perhaps more accurately suggested starting points are I just lost it. Okay. Suggested starting points are shown in bold italics. Notice how we suggest that you likely want to default to capturing usage in some way. basic domain concept, for example, via high-level conceptual diagram in some way and non-functional requirement in some way. There are different strategies you may want to consider for modeling. Choose the ones that make sense for your situation and not that ones that don't. You should also start thinking about your approach to managing your work. A light specification approach of writing up some index cards and a few whiteboard sketches is just one option you should consider. In DAD, we make it clear that agile teams do more than just implement new requirements. Hence, our recommendation to default to a work item list over a simplistic requirements product backlog strategy. Work items may include new requirements to be implemented, defects to be fixed, trainings, workshops, reviews of the other team work, and so on. There are all things that need to be sized, prioritized, and planned for. Finally, the goal diagram makes it clear that when you are exploring the initial scope of your effort, that you should capture a non-functional requirement such as reliability, privacy, availability, performance, security requirements among many is in some manner. The explore scope process goal is described in greater detail in chapter 9. We did not go through this small box, but this is so complicated. Let's read me out. Let me read it out to you. Our strategy with DA is to explicitly recognize that software development and IT and organizations in general are inherently complicated. DA doesn't try to dump things down into a handful of best practices. Instead, DA explicitly communicates the issues that you face, the options that you have, and the trade-offs that you are making, and simplifies the process of choosing the right strategies that meets your needs. DA provides scaffolding to help you make better process decisions. Yes, there are many process goals, 21 in fact, depicted in figure 5.2, which would you take out? We have seen teams not address risks in any way, but that is invariably went poorly for them. We have also seen teams choose not to address the goal improve quality, only to watch their technical debt rise. In practice, you can't satisfy sorry, you can't safely choose to ignore any of these goals. Similarly, consider a decision point in figure 5.4. Would you drop any of these? Likely not. Yes, it's a daunting thing that there is no or not so much to take into account to succeed at solution delivery in the long term, and what we have captured appears to be a minimal set for enterprise class solution development. Getting to the details, option tables and references. The next level of detail is the option tables, an example of which is shown in table 5.1 for explore scope, explore quality requirement decision point. Each table lists the option which are practices or strategies and the trade-offs for each one. The goal is to put each option into context and where appropriate point you to more details about that technique. We often point to Wikipedia indicated by a W reference and sometimes to a book or article such as executable specs for acceptance criteria. Table 5.1 describing the explore quality requirement decision point. So we have two columns. One is the option, order, and trade-offs. So the options available for this are ordered as was shown by arrow, and the trade-offs are available in front of it. So what is the option? Option is acceptance criteria. So these are the decision points. Basically, for explore quality requirement process, there are a number of decision points you can take, and one of those decision point option is acceptance criteria, which means quality focused approach that captures detailed aspects of a high level requirement from the point of view of stakeholders. And what are the trade-offs? Motivates teams to think through detailed requirements, dovetails nicely with the behavior driven development BDD or acceptance test driven development ATDD approach. Many quality requirements are cross cutting aspects of several functional stories, so relying on acceptance criteria alone risks missing details, particularly in new requirements identified later in the life cycle. Then we have explicit list. This enables us to capture quality requirements in a reusable manner that cross functional requirements. Not attaching quality requirements to specific functional requirements allows the option of using proof of technology spikes rather than waiting for an associated story. Require a mechanism such as acceptance criteria to ensure that a quality requirement is implemented across the appropriate functional requirement. And third option is, decision point is technical stories, simple strategy for capturing quality requirement that is similar to an explicit list. Works well when a quality requirement is straightforward and contained. Not appropriate for quality requirement that cross-cut many functional requirements because we can't address the quality requirement in a short period of time. How to apply process goals in process? Disciplined agilists can process goals in several common scenarios. Identify potential strategies to experiment with. We described guided process improvement (GCI) in chapter 1, where a team uses DAD as a reference to identify techniques to experiment with. Because DAD puts options into context, as you saw in table 5.1, you are more likely to identify a technique that will work for you in your environment. Enhancing retrospectives. The goal diagrams and supporting tables provide a toolkit of potential options that you can choose to experiment with to resolve challenges identified by the team. Checklists. Goal diagrams are often used by experienced teams to remind them of potential techniques that they could choose to apply in their current situation. Process tailoring workshops. Described in chapter 1, process tailoring workshops are often used by new teams to identify or negotiate how they will work together. The process goals often prove to be great resources to help focus those workshops, and an easy way to use them is to print them out and put them up on the wall and then work through them as a team. Maturity model. The ordered decision points effectively provide a focused maturity model around a given decision point. More importantly, ordered decision points are effectively vectors indicating an improvement path for teams to potentially flow. Have productive discussions about process choices. An interesting aspect of process goals is that some of the choices they provide really aren't very effective in practice. What we sometimes find teams following a technique because they believe that's the best strategy available. Maybe they have been told it's the best practice, maybe it is the best strategy they know about, maybe it is the best they can do right now, or maybe it's been prescribed to them by their adopted methodology and they never thought to look beyond it. Regardless, this strategy plus other valid options are now provided to them with a trade-off for each clearly described. This puts you in a better position to compare and contrast strategies and potentially choose a new strategy to experiment with. In summary, this book describes how you can choose your WoW, how your teams can truly own its process. The only way you can own your process is if you know what's for sale. DAD's process goals help to make your process choices and trade-offs associated with them explicit. In this chapter, we explored several key concepts. Although every team works in a unique way, they still need to address the same process goals, process outcomes. Process goals guide you through what you need to think about and your potential options. They don't prescribe what to do. DAD process goals provide you with choices, each of which have trade-offs. Strive to do the best you can do right now in the situation that you face and to learn and improve over time. If the DAD process goals appear overly complicated at first, ask yourself what you would remove. So this brings us to the end of 5th chapter. We move on to chapter 6, and this chapter 6 is choosing the right life cycle. Starting with a quotation by Nelson Mandela, May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears. First, going through the key points in this chapter, some teams within your organization will still follow a traditional life cycle. DAD explicitly recognizes this but does not provide support for this shrinking category of work. DAD provides the scaffolding required for choosing between and then evolving 6 solution delivery life cycles (SDLCs) based on either agile or lean strategies. Project-based life cycles, even agile and lean ones, go through phases. Every life cycle has its advantages and disadvantages. Each team needs to pick the one that best reflects their context. Common, lightweight, risk-based milestones enable consistent governance. You don't need to force the same process on all of your teams. Our team will start with a given life cycle and often evolve away from it as they continuously improve their work. So, starting the chapter, we have the privilege of working with organizations all over the world. When we go into an organization, often to coach them in how to improve their way of working, we get to observe what is actually happening within these organizations. One thing we see over and over again in all but the very smallest of enterprises is that they have several delivery life cycles in place across their teams. Some of these teams will be following a Scrum-based Agile project life cycle, whereas other will have adopted a Kanban-based lean life cycle. The more advanced teams, particularly those moving toward a DevOps mindset, will have adopted a continuous delivery approach, KIM. Some may be working on a brand new business idea and are following an experimental lean startup style of approach, and some teams may still be following a more traditional life cycle. The reason why this happens, as we described in chapter 2, is because each team is unique and in a unique situation. Teams need a WoW that reflects the context that they face. And an important part of choosing an effective WoW is to select a life cycle that best fits their situation. Disciplined agile delivery scaffolding provides life cycle choices to your delivery teams while enabling consistent governance across them. A quick history lesson: the traditional life cycle. First and foremost, the traditional life cycle is not supported by DAD. There are several different flavors of the traditional life cycle, sometimes called the serial life cycle, the waterfall life cycle, or even the predictive life cycle. Figure 6.1 depicts what is known as the V model. The basic idea is that a team works through functional phases such as requirement, architecture, and so on. At the end of each phase, there is often a quality gate, milestone review, which tends to focus on reviewing documentation. Testing occurs toward the end of the life cycle, and each testing phase, at least in V model, tends to correspond to an artifact creation phase earlier in the life cycle. The waterfall life cycle is based on 60s and 70s theories about how software development should work. Note that some organizations in the early 90s and 2000 mistakenly instantiated rational unified process as a heavyweight process too. So some practitioners think that RUP is a traditional process too. No, RUP is iterative and incremental, but was often implemented poorly by people who don't move away from the traditional mindset. So in front of you, figure 6.1, the traditional software development life cycle. Those who are related with software industry, they would quickly relate to it. You had a waterfall type model here. Everything happens and then you do something else and then something else. Like it starts uh, decomposing and defining, starting from definition, then architecture, then design, then construction, and then the V process model starts going back up. And here we are doing actually the integration and validation, and at every level there is a testing. So the construction is tested through a unit testing, and if there is some problem, you go back and fix the construction. Then we have functional testing. The functional testing, if there is something wrong, you go back to the design phase and correct that, and then start again moving to construction and downwards. If everything is passed in functional test, then you go on to the integration testing, which validates the architecture. And if there is something wrong, you go back and fix the architecture, then again go to design and construction, and this cycle goes on. And after integration, it is the final acceptance testing. And if there is something wrong with the acceptance testing, you may have to go back to the requirements. If the traditional approach is explicitly not included in DAD, why we are talking about it? Because some teams are currently following a waterfall approach and need help moving away from it. Worse yet, there are many people who believe that traditional strategies are applicable to a wide range of situations. In one sense, they are correct, but what they don't understand is that lean and agile strategies prove much better in practice for most of these situations. But as you will learn later in this chapter, there are a few situations where traditional strategies do in fact make sense, but just a very few. The project mindset leads to agile phase, and that's many organizations choose to fund solution delivery in terms of projects. These projects may be date driven and have a defined start and end date. They may be scope driven in that they must deliver specific functionality or a specific set of outcomes, or they may be cost driven in that they must come in on or under a desired budget. Some projects have a combination of these constraints, but the more constraints you put in on the delivery team, the greater the risk of project failure. Figure 6.2 depicts a high-level view of the project delivery lifecycle, and as you see, it has three phases. Okay. First of all, let's learn a little agile history lesson. It says the term iteration was first coined by Jim Highsmith, one of the creators of Agile Manifesto, in his book Agile Software Development Ecosystems in 2002. Highsmith. It was later adopted and renamed Sprint Zero by Scrum community. Anyways, Inception. Inception is sometimes called Sprint Zero or Iteration Zero, startup or initiation. The basic idea is that the team does just enough work to get organized and going to the right direction. The team will initially form itself and invest some time in initial requirements and architecture exploration, initial planning, aligning itself with the rest of the organization, and of course, securing funding for the rest of the project. This phase should be kept as simple and as short as possible while coming to an agreement on how the team believes it will accomplish the outcomes being asked of it by their stakeholders. The average Agile Lean team spends 11 work days, so a bit more than 2 weeks in inception activities, soft tab 18. Then is the construction phase. The aim of construction is to produce a consumable solution with sufficient functionality. That's known as a minimal marketable release, MMR. To be of value to stakeholders, the team will work closely with stakeholders to understand their needs, to build a quality solution for them, to get feedback from them on a regular basis, and then act on that feedback. The implication is that the team will be performing analysis, design, programming, testing, management activities, potentially every single day. More on this later. Transition is sometimes referred to as release sprint or a deployment sprint. And if the team is struggling with quality, a hardening sprint. The aim of transition is to successfully release your solution into production. This includes determining whether you are ready to deploy the solution and then actually deploying it. The average Agile Lean team spends 6 work days on transition activities. But when you exclude the teams that have fully automated testing and deployment, which we wouldn't do, it is an average of 8.5 days. Furthermore, 26% of teams have fully automated regression testing and deployment, and 63% perform transition in 1 day or less. Figure 6.2 shows the agile project lifecycle at very high level, in which a number of iterations are going on, and once the whole iteration cycle, all the iterations is completed in a release, we start with the next release. So the very first iteration is called iteration 0 or sprint 0. It is the inception, where we envision and plan. Then the construction thing starts, and there are a number of iterations going on during the construction. And finally, in the transition, we have a transition sprint, where this is the supposedly the last iteration where we release the solution. Although agile pursuit will balk at the concept of phases and will often jump through hoops such as called inception sprint 0 and transition or release sprint, the fact is that agile project team work in a serial manner at a high level. Team needs to invest some time at the beginning to get going in the right direction. Inception of the sprint 0, they need to spend time producing the solution construction, and they need to spend time deploying the solution transition of the release sprint. This happens in practice and is very easy to observe if you choose it. The important thing is to streamline your inception transition efforts as much as possible, and construction too for that matter. There is more to IT and your organization in general than solution delivery. For example, your organization is likely to have data management, enterprise architecture, operations, portfolio management, marketing, procurement, finance, and many other important organizational aspects. A full system product lifecycle goes from the initial concept, from the solution through delivery to operations and support, and often includes many rounds through the delivery lifecycle. Figure 6.3 depicts the system lifecycle, showing how the delivery lifecycle and the DevOps lifecycle, for that matter, is a subset of it. Although Figure 6.3 adds the concept, ideation, production, and retire phases, the focus of DAD in this book is on delivery. Disciplined Agile, however, includes strategies that encompasses DAD, disciplined DevOps, value stream, and the disciplined Agile enterprise in general. So what is there in figure 6.3? The system solution product lifecycle high level. So what do we have? Concept, inception, construction, transition, production, and retire. And as you understand, we just talked about inception, construction, and transition. This is the point of interest from the text we have just studied. But before that, there is a stage of conceptualization, then production and retire, because in the disciplined agile delivery, we are concerned only with the delivery. So we start with inception in the transition, whereas DevOps stage starts from construction and ends with production. So what do? We envision when we are conceptualizing, and we create the roadmaps, get going in right direction. This is an inception, and then we have a to-do list, and then we collaborate and do that thing. Collaboratively build a consumable solution in a number of iterations, naturally in an evolutionary manner, and then we release the solution in transition, and we keep getting back to next release and next release. And then we operate and support during production, and if there is any change request, we can go back to to-do list and we can correct that. And ultimately, decommissioning solution occurs when we retire. Shift left, shift right, deliver continuously. Starts with a cartoon in which two ladies are standing. On the left, older lady, she says, "We can't afford to write automated regression tests." And on the right, the other lady says, "Actually, we can't afford manual testing anymore." So you see the difference of opinion. Although some teams will take a project-based approach, not all of them do. And over time, we expect this trend to grow. When a team is allowed to stay together for a long period of time, typically longer than a single project, we call this a stable or long-standing team. When a long-standing team is allowed to evolve in its WoW, we have seen some incredible things happen. They become teams capable of continuous delivery. The term shift left is popular among agilists, often being used to indicate that testing and quality practices are being performed throughout the entire life cycle. This is a good thing, but there's more to the shifting trend than there are several important trends summarized in figure 6.4 that will affect the way the team evolves its work. Number one, testing and quality practices shift left. Agilists are clearly shifting testing practices left through greater automation and via replacing written specifications with executable specifications via practices such as test-driven development and behavioral-driven development. TDD and adoption of these strategies are key motivators for an infrastructure as code strategy where activities that are mostly manual on traditional teams become fully automated on agile teams. Just a moment. Okay. Okay, yes, here it is. So what do you see? We have a figure 6.4, how life cycles evolve when you shift our activities activities left and right. Let us see what is happening here. We have got a serial life cycle, requirements, architecture, design, construction, test, and deploy. If we evolution from tradition to agile projects, testing and quality shift left. So testing and quality is shifting towards the left, meaning we are moving it towards the requirement. Whereas in the lower diagram, lower arrow, modeling and planning is to be shifted right. Agile lean project lifecycle, we have inception, construction, and transition, which correspond with the architectural testing. And if we are applying the shift left on this agile lean project lifecycle, then we are evolution from agile projects to continuous delivery. And continuous delivery is construction, meaning what we are making the things much more simpler and easier to follow. Second, modeling and planning practice shift right. Agilists have also shifted modeling, mapping, and planning practices to the right in the life cycle so that we can adopt to the feedback we have received from stakeholders. In DAD, modeling and planning are so important that we do them all the way through the life cycle in a collaborative and iterative manner. Stakeholder interaction shifts right. DAD teams interact with stakeholders throughout the entire endeavor, not just during the requirement and test phases at the beginning and end of the life cycle. Stakeholders feedback shift left. Traditional teams tend to leave serious stakeholders feedback to user acceptance testing performed during the traditional test phase. DAD teams, on the other hand, seek to gain stakeholder feedback as early and as regularly as possible throughout the entire endeavor. Deployment practices shift left. Deployment practices are being fully automated by agile team, another infrastructure as code strategy so as to support continuous deployment. CD is a linchpin practice for DAD's two continuous delivery life cycles described below. The real good goal is continuous delivery. All of the shifting left and shifting right results in teams that are able to work in a continuous delivery manner. Process improvement is about working smarter, not harder. Choice is DAD's life cycles. Again, starts with a cartoon, two people standing in a conference room. Uh, the person on the left saying DAD supports 6 life cycles and hundreds of agile practices. And the other person, the boss looking person, says choice is good. DAD supports several life cycles for teams to choose from. These life cycles, described in detail below and summarized in figure 6.5, are agile, based on the Scrum construction life cycle. Teams following the project life cycle will produce consumer solutions via short iterations, also known as sprints or time boxes. Continuous delivery agile. Teams following the agile-based life cycle will work in very short iterations, typically 1 week or less, where at the end of each iteration, their solution is released into production. Lean. Based on Kanban, teams following this project life cycle will visualize their work, reduce work in progress to streamline their workflow, and pull work into the team one item at a time. 4. Continuous delivery lean. Teams following this lean-based lifecycle will release their work into production whenever possible, typically several times a day. Exploratory, these teams following this life cycle based on lean startup and design thinking in general will explore a business idea by developing one or more minimal viable products which they run as experiments to determine what potential consumers actually want. The life cycle is often applied when a team faces a wicked problem in their domain. And lastly, program. A program is effectively a large team that is organized into a team of teams. So DAD life cycles are uh, displayed here with their monograms in this diagram. Now let's explore each of these life cycles in greater detail. After that, we will discuss when to consider adopting each one. First of all is the DAD Agile life cycle. DAD Agile life cycle shown in figure 6.6 is based largely upon the Scrum life cycle with proven governance concept adopted from the unified process to make it enterprise ready. The life cycle is often adopted by project teams focused on developing a single release of a solution, although sometimes a team will stay together and follow it again, single release of for a next release and the next release after that and so on. In many ways, this life cycle depicts how a Scrum-based project life cycle works in an enterprise class setting. We are working with several teams that like to think of this as Scrum++ without being constrained by the Scrum community's cultural imperative to gloss over the activities of solution delivery that they find inconvenient. There are several critical aspects in this life cycle. For example, the inception phase, as we described earlier, the team's focus is to do just enough work to get organized and going in the right direction. DAD aims to streamline the entire life cycle from beginning to end, including the initiation activities addressed by inception. Inception ends when we have an agreed upon vision regarding the expected outcomes for the team and how we are going to achieve them. Construction is organized into short iterations. An iteration is a short period of time, typically 2 weeks or less, in which the delivery team produces a new potentially consumable version of their solution. Of course, for a new product or solution, you may not have something truly consumable until after having completed several iterations. This phase ends when we have sufficient functionality, also known as a minimal marketable release MMR. Team address work items in small batches. Working in small batches is a fundamental of Scrum, and because this lifecycle is based on Scrum, it is an important aspect of it. DAD teams, regardless of lifecycle, are likely to work on a range of things, implementing new functionality, providing stakeholders with positive outcomes, running experiments, addressing end user change requests coming in from usage of the current solution, running in production, paying down technical debt, and taking training, and many more. Work items are typically prioritized by the product owner primarily by business value, although risk, due dates, and severity in the case of change requests may also be taken into account. The address changing stakeholder needs process goals. Chapter 16 provides a range of options for managing work items. In each iteration, the team pulls a small batch of work off the work item list that they believe they can achieve during that iteration. Critical ceremonies have a defined cadence. Also, like Scrum, this lifecycle schedules several agile ceremonies on several cadences. At the beginning of each iteration, the team performs detailed planning for the iteration, and at the end of the iteration, we hold a demonstration. We hold a retrospective to evolve our WoW, and we make a go forward decision. We also hold a daily coordination meeting. The point is that by describing when to hold these important work sessions, we take some of the guesswork out of the process. The downside in the Scrum injects a fair bit of process overhead with ceremonies. This is a problem that the lean lifecycle addresses. Transition phase. Aim of the transition phase is to ensure that the solution is ready to be deployed, and if so, to deploy it, this phase can be automated away which is exactly what happens when evolving towards the two continuous delivery life cycles. Explicit milestones. This life cycle supports the full range of straightforward risk-based milestone as you see depicted along the bottom of the life cycle. The milestones enable leadership to govern effectively. More or more on this later. By lightweight, we mean that milestones do not need to be formal bureaucratic review of artifacts. Ideally, they are merely placeholders for discussion regarding the status and health of the initiative. See the governed delivery team goal in chapter 27 for a more detailed discussion of how to keep milestones light. Enterprise guidance and roadmaps are explicitly shown. On the left-hand side of the life cycle, you see that important flows come into the team from outside of the delivery life cycle. That's because solution delivery is just part of your organization's overall DevOps strategy, which in turn is part of your overall IT strategy. For example, the initial vision and funding for your endeavor may be coming from a product management group, and the roadmaps and guidance from other areas such as enterprise architecture, data management, security, name a few. Remember, DAD teams work in an enterprise aware manner, and one aspect of doing so is to adopt and follow appropriate guidance. Operations and support are depicted. If your team is working on the new release of an existing solution, then you are likely to receive change requests from existing end users, typically coming to you via your operations and support efforts. For teams working in a DevOps environment, it may be that you are responsible for running and supporting your solution in production. Here we are with figure 6.6, DAD's Agile life cycle, and if you look at it closely, you will see it starts. The inception, construction, and transition is shown there, and then we have got the roadmaps and guidance. There's the envisioning going on, initial vision and funding is coming, initial modeling, planning, and organization, which gives rise to the initial requirements which are lying in a product backlog. And we have got a number of work items there. Uh, those highest priority work items are taken up by the sprint, and iteration backlog is there, and then we are doing those tasks in the iteration, and we are having the daily work or daily scrum. Daily coordination meetings are happening, stand-up meetings. Initial architectural vision is transferred to the iteration. Consumable solutions are then moving on, um, iteration by iteration wrap up, demo to stakeholders, go forward decision, evolve your WoW. This all is happening in ultimately into a consumable solution being released to the customer, and ultimately operate and support solution in production. So you see all of these things are happening in the same cycle we just discussed. In Inception, one or more short iterations are there, whereas stakeholder vision is at the end of the inception, proven architecture in the beginning of the construction, many short iterations happening in which the continued viability is happening, sufficient functionality have been achieved by the end of the construction, and then one or more short iterations in which the production is ready and stakeholder is delighted. Okay, let me go through this also, this small little page. DAD is continuous delivery agile lifecycle. DAD's continuous delivery agile lifecycle shown in figure 6.7 is a natural progression from the agile lifecycle of figure 6.6. Teams typically evolve to the lifecycle from the agile lifecycle, often adopting iteration lengths of 1 week or less. The key difference between this and the agile lifecycle is that the continuous delivery agile lifecycle results in a release of new functionality at the end of each iteration rather than after several iterations. There are several critical aspects to this life cycle. Automation and technical practices are key. Team requires a mature set of technical practices around automated regression testing, continuous integration CI, and continuous development CD. To support these practices, investment in tools and paying down technical debt, and in particular writing the automated regression test that are missing needs to occur. Inception occurred in the past when the team was first initiated. Inception would have occurred, and it may have occurred again when significant change occurred, such as a major shift in business direction or technical direction. So, if such a shift occurs again, then yes, you should definitely invest sufficient effort to reorient the team. So we see this is an activity, not a phase. Hence, inception is depicted. Having said this, we do see teams stop every few months and explicitly invest several days to negotiate at a higher level. What they will do for the next few months, this is something that SAFe calls big room planning, and agile modeling calls an agile modeling session. These techniques are discussed in Coordinate Activities Process Goal, Chapter 23. Transition has become an activity. Through automation of testing and deployment, the transition phase has evolved from a multi-day and a multi-week effort to a fully automated activity that takes minutes or hours. Explicit milestones and incoming workflow, there are still common risk-based milestones to support consistent governance. Some milestones are no longer appropriate in particular stakeholder vision, and proven architecture would have been addressed in the past. Although if major changes occur, there is no reason why you couldn't address these milestones again. Incoming workflows from other parts of the organization are shown, just as with the agile and lean life cycles. And here we have the DAD continuous delivery agile life cycle. Let me fix that. Okay, you can see here the similar type of diagram, but showing only the construction, work items, and the things that are going on. Iteration backlog is there, and consumable solution is coming out. So rest everything is same. What is happening in construction? Continuous team of development is released at the end of the each iteration. Sufficient functionality, production ready, and delighted stakeholder is there. And DAD lean lifecycle shown in figure 6.8 promotes lean principles such as minimizing work in process, maximizing flow, a continuous stream of work instead of fixing iterations and reducing bottlenecks. The project-oriented lifecycle is often adopted by teams who are new to agile lean, who face rapidly changing stakeholder needs, a common issue for teams evolving, sustaining our existing legacy solutions, and by traditional teams that don't want to take on the risk of the cultural and process disruption usually caused by agile adoption, at least not right away. There are several critical aspects of this life cycle, and probably we'll discuss it tomorrow. So I'm leaving you at the end of page 91. That's it for today. If there are any comments. I do understand that this is too technical for those who are not from the field of IT or software development. This might be all Greek for you. But if at all you are from this area, it's very easy to understand what is relating to. So probably Ashish sir, I don't know if you are comfortable with it or not.
मन बोलना आपने सर अस्सलाम वालेकुम नो इश्यू सर आईटी ज़ाहिर है आईटी फील्ड मेरा है तो नहीं बट आई एम कंफर्टेबल चीजें ज़ाहिर है हमने तो उसके हिसाब से एजाइल के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में और दूसरा प्रोजेक्ट मैनेजमेंट के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में देखनी है तो इतनी समझ आ जाती है सर ठीक है ऑल वेल सर माशाल्लाह
वंडरफुल वंडरफुल जबरदस्त
जी सर दूसरा एक आध फ्रेंड की सर कंपनी है वो आईटी से रिलेटेड है और ये चीजें मैं उसको बता के इम्प्रेस भी करता हूँ सर समटाइम्स He's running a very good company. اور وہ میں آپ کو صاحب صرف یہ چیز شیئر کر رہی تھی کہ جو کچھ آپ نے ایجائل میں اور پروجیکٹ مینجمنٹ میں پڑھایا نا سر، خاص طور پہ جو
جی جی
آپ کی وہ انوالومنٹ انگیجمنٹ کی باتیں ساری ہوتی تھی،
جی جی
وہ ہی ڈز اٹ ون وے اور پتہ نہیں، میں اس سے پہلے اس کے اوپر ہنستا تھا کہ یار تم کیوں کرتے ہو، بٹ وہ ہی از کنٹرولنگ دی کمپنی فرام کینیڈا اینڈ ہی ڈز آل دیز کانسیپٹس.
بالکل
پرابلی اس نے پڑھا ہوگا
جی جی
یہ ساری چیزیں، آپ پڑھتے ہیں نہیں پڑھی لیکن اپلائی کرتا ہے وہ.
ہاں جی نہیں بالکل بالکل وہ لوگ تو کر رہے ہیں نا اپلائی. تو
جی سر، اور اب یہ سارے ہم اس کو بتا کے میں امپریس کرتا رہتا ہوں کہ یار مطلب آئی ایم ان کمپٹیشن وتھ، بات نہیں ہے.
اچھا سہیل رشید سہیل خالد صاحب آر یو اوکے؟
جی جناب. ہاں ایبسلیوٹلی. تو میری تو فیلڈ ہی آئی ٹی ہے،
اچھا
تو میرے لحاظ سے یہ ساری چیزیں جو ہیں یہ ہم دیکھتے ہی آ رہے ہیں
اچھا بس
مختلف لائف سے.
یہ جو ڈی اے ڈی ہے نا سر، یہ اس وقت رائزنگ ٹرینڈ ہے. اور یہ آپ جو بات کرتے ہیں نا ورکنگ وے آف ورکنگ، یہ ایک بالکل ہی
بالکل
کسٹمائزیبل وے آف ورکنگ بنا رہے ہیں. اگر آپ اس کو فالو کرتے ہیں تو وہ سیف اور وہ سب کچھ جو دوسرے طریقے ہیں وہ سب ڈیزالو ہو جاتے ہیں، وہ سب اس کے اندر ہی آ جاتا ہے. اور یہ
صحیح
پی ایم آئی کی ریکمینڈیڈ اور پی ایم آئی کی اپنی اپروچ ہے. اپروچ اس طرح کہ پی ایم آئی ہیز باٹ دس کمپنی ڈی اے ڈی. یہ
صحیح
تو
صحیح
فیوچر اسی کے اندر ہے سارا.
جناب.
چلیں جی، تھینک یو ویری مچ فار یور کمپنی. اور میں
ٹھیک
نے
ہے، تھینک یو.
زیادہ ٹائم بھی نہیں لیا اور آپ نے بالکل بیٹھے رہے آپ لوگ. تھینک یو ویری مچ اینڈ ٹیک کیئر. کل انشاءاللہ پھر ہم ادھر سے آگے شروع کرتے ہیں. ٹیک کیئر جی، خدا حافظ.